嘿，大家好，欢迎来到区块先生的人物放大镜。今天很开心的可以邀请到 Sei Network 的创始人 Jay 来让我们认识一下一个全新的一条公链。那大家如果有任何问题想要问 Jay 的话，欢迎在底下留言来告诉我们，我们也会一一的把这些问题丢给团队来去获得到一个答案哦。那在开始之前，我要提醒大家，加密货币投资非常高风险的一件事情，如果你不懂的话，就绝对不要碰。今天讲的都不是任何的金融建议。那我们先让 Jay 来做一个自我介绍。Jay, can you welcome to come to the show? And then, it's really glad to have you here. And then, let our audience to learn more about Sei and then what you guys are building. Let's kick off with your intro first.
Awesome, yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for having me on, and thanks for everyone who's listening in right now. I'm a co-founder for Sei Labs, and my background is that I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's actually where I met my co-founder. So both of us did speech and debate back in high school, and when we were in 10th grade, we did a practice debate against one another because we went to competing high schools, and that's where we originally met each other. We stayed in touch ever since then. So he went off to UC Berkeley. I went off to UCLA to study computer science. And I personally ended up getting into crypto back in 2017. My roommate at the time, he was going through Binance Labs. So both of us worked on a couple of different projects together. And afterwards, I ended up joining Robinhood. So I spent almost 4 years over there. I saw the company 10x, and I was an engineering lead when the entire GameStop saga happened back in 2021. So for anyone listening in who hasn't really heard of the GameStop saga before, what basically happened is that there was roughly a dozen different stocks that were basically just pumping to the moon, right? So they were going up in price a lot. And just one day out of the blue, Robinhood turned off buys for these stocks. So most of the people that were buying these stocks, they were buying it on Robinhood, which is a brokerage. And understandably, once Robinhood took away the ability for people to buy, a lot of the buy pressure just went away, right? And the stock price started to drop. So a lot of people were extremely unhappy with Robinhood, and Robinhood just didn't do anything to really clarify what was going on. It came out afterwards that there were a lot of different things going on. Robinhood needed to put up collateral with the NSCC, and there was a lot of, I think, complexity around that situation. But from the user viewpoint, people were just mad. So when that happened, a bunch of people reached out to me, right? So first of all, my team, I was an engineering lead back then. So basically everyone on my team asked me yo, what's going on? And leadership hadn't communicated anything to us. So I had nothing to tell them. Additionally, I got reached out to by a bunch of old friends, colleagues. Some of them were pretty mad, right? Because they just lost money from this decision that Robinhood had made. And I had nothing to be telling them either. And I mean, as you can imagine, it was just an incredibly chaotic situation. So after going through that experience myself, I became much more of a decentralization maxi, because anything that happens on chain is inherently trustless. And that's massive, right? That would have avoided the issues with Robinhood. That also would have avoided the issues that we saw repeatedly with centralized entities in general, right? The issues with 3AC, the issues with FTX. And that's why back in 2021, one of the friends that had hit me up was Jeff. He was just okay, we basically both just started brainstorming around what could have been done to improve the situation with Robinhood. We realized that building it a decentralized way would have helped. So 2 years ago, we originally started building something like Robinhood, except building it in a decentralized way. So a decentralized exchange. And that's where we got started off from. We then started looking into how we can build a DEX, realized that the infrastructure is lacking, which led us to building Sei. So Sei is a general purpose layer 1, where every single part of the stack has been optimized for trading.
Got it. That's a really interesting story. I mean, I personally didn't buy GME, but on our channel, we talk about the whole WSB situation with Citadel and all that. It's almost like the little guys are fighting with the Goliath, the giants. And that goes to show how much, power when it comes to centralization. There's always different type of reason why these situations happen, and most of the time it's because it's taking away someone's profit or someone's losing money, and that's most likely going to be the big guys thinking, "Oh, finally the small guys are fighting back. We gotta take away their weapons." Awesome. And you briefly, talk about Sei and how that's, in a way designed for trading. And you guys started trying to build kind of a decentralized Robinhood, which is will be a DEX, right? A decentralized DEX. How did that go? And then how from that experience come to Sei? And is there a reason why, have you thought about building that decentralized Robinhood on other chain before?
Yeah, so a lot of things to unpack over there. The first thing, I guess, around Robinhood specifically, it was definitely pretty interesting because what happened in that situation was Robinhood needed to post collateral with the NSCC, and they basically needed to post $2 billion extra. And I mean, decisions like that, no one really even knows why that specific number was the requirement that needed to be there. In the congressional hearing and all of these things that happened afterwards, no one really provided clarity around that. So yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally just these centralized institutions are not the future. I just fundamentally believe that in the longer term, most financial systems are going to have more trustlessness built into them, because that does just lead to a much better user experience. And I think that these values are going to be permeating just the financial sector in the future. And yeah, I mean, exactly as you said, we initially started building a DEX, right? So we started looking into all the infrastructure we could use to build a DEX. So every layer 1, every layer 2, we considered hybrid approaches. And what we ultimately started noticing was what we internally called as the exchange trilemma. So between decentralization, capital efficiency, and scalability, every exchange out there right now is only able to get 2 of the 3. So for example, if you look at something like Uniswap V2, Uniswap V2 gets decentralization and scalability, but not capital efficiency. That's what led to Uniswap V3, right? Yeah. And Uniswap V3 gets decentralization and capital efficiency, but it's not quite as scalable.
Yeah.
And we don't think that the solution here is to keep iterating on exchange mechanism design. We don't think V2, Uniswap V2, Uniswap V3, Uniswap V4 is the solution to this trilemma. Instead, we think that a complete rewrite of the underlying infrastructure is what's really going to be the solution. And that's how innovation typically works. There's this idea of application infrastructure cycles, which is that there's some new infrastructure that gets created. This leads to new types of applications that are enabled. And then eventually, these applications start needing more specialized infrastructure to help support their use cases. One example of this would be the database industry. You started off with infrastructure like Oracle getting created. This led to all the applications we saw in Web 1 and Web 2. And now we're starting to see more specialized infrastructure getting created. For example, there's Databricks Warehouse, which is tailor-made for AI and ML, right? We think the exact same thing is happening in crypto. We started off with Ethereum. This led to all of the decentralized applications that we know and love today. Many of them have not found product market fit yet, especially once you take away the token-based incentives. But exchanges have. Exchanges are the most important type of application in crypto. And that's why we have started building Sei, which is helping build this specialized infrastructure for these exchanges. And internally, we have just one core thesis, which is that the exchange of digital assets is the most fundamental use case for blockchains, because every single successful application in crypto right now is either directly or indirectly a trading application, right?
Correct.
So if you look at, let's say, OpenSwap or OpenSea and Uniswap, I mean, those are NFT marketplace, exchange. Those are both very clearly trading applications because you trade things on them. If you look at STEPN, right? STEPN's the game, but STEPN also has a marketplace built into it. And that marketplace ends up being one of the biggest sources of activity for STEPN. So STEPN is quite directly a trading application. Same thing with MetaMask. The core reason that people install MetaMask is to be able to go on chain and then trade on chain. So even if you put aside the swap feature of MetaMask, it's still a trading application. So the question then just becomes like, how do you build this specialized infrastructure for exchanges? And I mean, that's exactly what we're focusing on from Sei's side, to build the best, most performant infrastructure for exchanges.
Got it. Okay. And so that's kind of the reason why, right? So what makes Sei different from some of the existing layer one that we know?
Yeah. So when we got started, we considered building on general purpose layer ones. And we started looking at the landscape of solutions that are out there, right? You have tools or you have chains like Ethereum.
Yeah.
Solana would be another big one that would have been a great choice at that time to consider building a layer one on, or to consider building an exchange on. And there were also at that time discussions of Aptos and Sui, which have obviously materialized now. And all of them run into pretty similar sets of issues. Especially for trading applications, you start seeing the same issues with every existing layer one. The biggest and most fundamental issue is around time to finality. The second issue is around throughput. And the third issue is around user experience. So I guess in terms of time to finality, right? Time to finality is how long it takes for a block that is added to the network to be considered part of the final chain. And most chains right now, they have multi-slot finality. So what this means is a block can be added to the chain by one validator, but then afterwards it might get reorged.
Correct.
So that's why there's a finalization period, which might be 6 blocks, it might be longer, depending on which chain you're looking at. And most major chains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, they all have this concept of multi-slot finality. So the issue with this is that if you're trying to trade on it, and I mean, honestly, if you're trying to use that chain at all for any type of application, it just becomes much clunkier. So one example would be, if you're a market maker, you want to open a position on Ethereum, and then you want to hedge it off chain. Let's say you want to hedge it on Binance, right? How would you do that? One way that you could do that is when the block is added to the network, you could go ahead and hedge it. So you buy one Ether and then you immediately hedge it on Binance as soon as that block is added before it's finalized. What then happens if that block is reorged? Well, if a reorg happens, then suddenly the price that your order might get filled on chain might be different, right? Because either that, like some time will have passed. So when your order eventually does get filled on chain, it might get filled at a different price, or that order might just never get filled on chain. So you're left holding this position off chain, this short position off chain, and the position that you get on chain might be different, or you might not get that at all. The end result of that is that you as the market maker lose money. And the way that market makers account for this risk is by offering wider spreads. So that just leads to a worse user experience when there's wider spreads. The other thing that market makers could do is they could wait until a block is finalized. Ethereum's case, this might be something like 60 seconds. And after that block is finalized, that's when you're like, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and open this short position on Binance. The issue there is that during that 60-second window, the price of the asset you just bought might have changed, right? So it might have changed by, let's say, 20 basis points. And that's a huge amount of exposure that market makers would need to take on. So that then also just results in them offering wider spreads. So the approach that we ended up taking with Sei is using single slot finality. So Sei makes use of twin turbo consensus. And this allows us to have single slot finality, which means for a block to be added to the network, it needs to go through consensus between every single validator and needs to get 2/3 voting power to support that block before it's added to the network. So this results in reorgs being impossible on Sei. This results in a better market making experience. And this also results in 450 millisecond time to finality. So that's one of the things we focused on. I'll briefly touch on the other two. So we offer parallelization as well to help with improving throughput, because we fundamentally believe that as more and more activity starts to happen on chain, you cannot have a single threaded virtual machine like the Ethereum virtual machine. We just do not think that is the future for how compute is going to be happening on chain. So we added in multiple types of parallelization into Sei, which help us get up to 20,000 orders per second that can be processed, which is a magnitude more than basically every other ecosystem out there. And the last thing that we've added in is a native matching engine into the chain. So this helps with preventing front running for anyone making use of this native matching engine, which helps improve the user experience. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the, I would say a combination of all three of these things have resulted in Sei being the fastest chain out there. That has just resulted in substantially better user experiences. And that's why at this point we have over 120 applications that are building on Sei ahead of the mainnet launch.
Got it. And what's your thought about kind of the growth of most of the layer one right now? Because when, and like you said, when you guys started building Aptos and Sui hasn't launched yet, there was pretty much only Solana on kind of the design specifically for that purpose. And now seeing the growth of Sui and Aptos in a much slower phase than when Solana first came out back in 2019, 2020, 2021. The growth is much slower. And when the growth is slow and less TVO on a chain, then then there's a new problem for most of the DeFi protocol that's built on top of it, because the liquidity is low. You can't really do big swaps. Then market maker wouldn't choose to use it.
Yeah, so I mean, this just points to the most fundamental question for any crypto infrastructure, which is you can go ahead and launch, and there will be a ton of hype, ton of publicity around the launch. But what happens afterwards, right? Like, what makes people actually want to use your chain? The fundamental answer to that question is you need killer apps in that. And the question is then, how do you get killer apps to get built? And I mean, you really just need good developers to start building in your ecosystem. And once there's good developers, it kind of becomes like, you kind of become like either a venture capital firm or a game publisher, like different mental models to think about it. But from the layer one standpoint, you need to work with as many good developers as you can and help them out in every single way possible. So this means help them out from the standpoint of raising money. This means helping them out from go-to-market, so marketing, any kind of support that they need around like tokenomics and figuring out like how to actually get the product built. So just assist them in every step of the process, right? And some of these developers will be building the killer apps that are there on Sei in the future. And this is what's going to result in retail users coming on, which as soon as there's retail users in any ecosystem, that then leads to more institutional and sophisticated players coming on. So the way that Sei is approaching this is by just helping out developers in every conceivable way. One of the things that there is there's a $120 million ecosystem and liquidity fund that has been announced for Sei. So this is investors and market makers that have contributed money to deploy, first of all, for investing into applications on Sei that are starting to get traction. So any developer that's building an interesting app will be able to work with these investors. And anyone that needs on-chain liquidity will be able to get market makers to help provide that liquidity on-chain. There's also going to be multiple hackathons and other types of events happening for developers to get more engaged with the Sei ecosystem. But yeah, I mean, the most fundamental thing around all of this is just getting good developers to start building on Sei.
Got it. That sounds great. So how do developer reach out to these this ecosystem fund and some of these market maker and investors?
Yeah. So if you want to get in touch with the Sei team, you can go ahead and follow Sei on Twitter, reach out to Sei mods on Discord, and then you can get connected with folks from the Sei ecosystem, and then they can help proceed from there.
Okay. And that 150 million is in cash, or is that in Sei token or other tokens?
So that depends on the specific investor and specific market makers, but it would be in cash that would be deployed into those projects or deployed onto like those exchanges on chain.
Got it. Okay, and follow back to how you describe Sei, right? It being optimized for trading, for exchanging digital asset, let it be NFT and so on. Do you see? Because we can kind of see through how other layer one and layer two are doing, where we don't really see NFT and some of the digital asset, such as STEPN, really moving off from their existing, original chain, such as the shoes STEPN launch were on Solana. even though they launch another version on Binance, the Solana shoes doesn't get traded on Binance. The Binance shoe don't trade on Solana. So for the trading side, how do you envision where these NFT assets start trading on Sei, and why should they, trade on Sei?
Yeah, so in terms of the type of activity we're going to start seeing on Sei, I would say that at the very start, before we had this ecosystem and liquidity fund, it was mostly projects from other ecosystems that were launching instances on Sei.
Okay.
Afterwards, we started seeing much more activity around native projects. So projects who are only building on Sei, and that is what 100% of their attention is focused on. In the long term, I think both types of applications will exist. One example of a project that is really big that has come over from another ecosystem is Sushi. So Sushi Swap is launching their first instance outside of Ethereum on Sei, and they're starting off with a perpetuals exchange. And they're going to be launching an entire suite of products on Sei in the longer term. And I'm honestly very excited about that because there's a lot of success that Sushi Swap has had in the past. And I think that one of the limitations for them is being able to build on better infrastructure moving forward. So that's one of the reasons they were particularly excited about being able to launch multiple exchanges on Sei in the longer term. In terms of more native projects, there's different types of NFT collections. There's different types of kind of social applications that I can get into later as well that are building on Sei. In terms of why an NFT collection or why an NFT marketplace would make sense to build on Sei, I would say it's a combination of the three things that I'd mentioned before. So first of all, around time to finality, this 450 millisecond time to finality is a massive improvement for the user experience, right? Like in Web 2, there's been decades of research that has been done into, I guess, Web 1 and Web 2, into how having faster latencies results in users staying on that specific application and not getting distracted and going somewhere else. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with like the crypto user experience right now. Like you click a button and then you have to wait like 20 seconds for something to happen. And like people just like, you can't really build more polished applications such as like a game where every single action happens on chain. You can really only have like very small movement of digital assets happening. So I do think that that's going to result in a vastly improved user experience. The second thing that I would point out is just around exchanges. They typically end up aggregating in ecosystems where there's more liquidity. So if there is liquidity on, say, from other types of exchanges, maybe spot exchanges that are resulting in a lot of activity, a lot of users, and a lot of liquidity, that ends up being a magnet for every other type of application. So not just NFT marketplaces, but anything else that you can think of. So every single DeFi type of application, every type of social application, every game, like it just makes much more sense to start building in an ecosystem where there is liquidity, because that is what leads to more people that start to use your specific application as well. And I think that's one of the stronger selling points for the projects that are building on Sei. Exchanges end up being the magnet that attract both normal users and also every other type of application. And I think that's why Sei started seeing that ecosystem growth that it has.
Got it. Another question I have is, most of the time when I talk to protocols that are thinking to go to another layer one, their main issue is, not being able to kind of convert from their existing code to match the new layer one, right? So what are some of the tools and resources out there to, let's say, for a protocol that's built on with Solidity or Viper that can, bridge to Sei?
Yeah. So the way that Sei is built right now, the smart contracts it allows are COSM WASM smart contracts.
Yeah.
So these are Rust-based smart contracts. So anyone that has built any type of application in a chain that supports COSM WASM can just copy and paste them and they'll work on Sei. In terms of Solana-based applications, there's a project called Nitro, which is deployed on Sei. So Nitro is an optimistic SVM-based rollup that is built on Sei. And Nitro will allow anyone to port over their Solana applications and start running them on Sei. And in the longer term, what we believe is that infrastructure really shouldn't be tied to a specific execution environment, right? Like if you look at any kind of Web2 application, you don't really know what programming language it's written in. And I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter. Like you don't really care whether it's written like Python or like some other programming language. We think the exact same thing is going to be happening in the long term for infrastructure. So in Sei's case, every single type of execution environment will be built into Sei, and it will be interoperable with all of the other types of execution environments that are there. So one of the things on Sei's roadmap is to support EVM interoperability. So there will be an EVM module that is built into Sei, and that will be interoperable with the COSM WASM smart contracts that are there on Sei, and with all of the other types of functionality the base chain offers. That will
That's
be one
ready?
of the... Sorry, what?
The module is already ready for the...
No,
okay.
That'll be on the roadmap for Sei after mainnet, but that will be getting built into the core chain.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, and another question I have is when I think about Sei, why is it not built as a layer 2 and instead built as a layer 1?
Yeah, so the fundamental issues with layer 2s right now, especially if you're going to build them on top of Ethereum DL1, is throughput. So the way that rollups work is that there's computation that happens off-chain. And then afterwards, like this off-chain rollup, it's tracking the state for the rollup. Yeah. And then all the transactions get taken, they get compressed, and then they are written off-chain, or they're written on the layer 1. And the issue there is that Ethereum right now, it has a target limit of 15 million gas per block. And every single byte of data that is written on-chain costs 16 gas. So if you do the math, it comes out to be around 6,000 transactions that can actually happen off-chain that can get written to the core layer 1. Now, Ethereum has this scaling kind of centric roadmap, and there's going to be dank sharding, and before dank sharding, there's going to be proto-dank sharding that they roll out. Proto-dank sharding doesn't solve any of the issues around throughput. Proto-dank sharding lets you get from around 6 KTPS to 6.7 KTPS. And dank sharding is going to be a much, I would say, longer project that'll take several years to actually get rolled out. And even in that case, it's going to be not like, it'll be closer to like 50,000 TPS, but in reality, it's not going to be like sending Ether back and forth. It'll be much more complicated transactions that would need to happen. So actually being able to build applications that are able to get high throughput on a single state machine rather than on like multiple shards or multiple rollups, that's going to be much more difficult to do on top of Ethereum. So that's what we were thinking back in 2021. And that's why we decided to focus on building layer 1. And yeah, I mean, we definitely think that right now, if you want to have a single state machine that allows for different smart contracts to be interoperable with each other, the only way you can really do that on any kind of production setting is through a layer 1. And then in the future, like I think that there are a lot of pretty interesting improvements happening around this idea of like modular blockchains. But there are a lot of issues that come up around that as well, because instead of just having one system that needs to be functional well, you now end up having multiple different dependencies, and each of those dependencies need to be functioning well. Otherwise, you run into liveness issues with the system overall.
Got it. And then the consensus is built on, and then also the smart contracts using the Cosmo WASM, right? How's that relationship, and why do you guys choose to use Cosmo?
Yeah. So when we got started with Sei, we wanted to build a layer 1. So then we considered the different ways of doing it, right? One approach is to just build everything from scratch. And the other approach is to take something that's already been built and then improve on that. So the downside of building everything from scratch is that you end up kind of recreating the wheel a lot. So things around like signature verification, things around state management, you have to rewrite all of that yourself. And it's not really as efficient. Whereas if you just take something like the Cosmos SDK, you use that as your base, and then you start building in the functionality you need, it allows you to iterate much faster. And it allows you to take the parts that you want to change and change them specifically once you're ready to add in new functionality. So in our case, we got started building with the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint Core. And then originally we added in that native matching engine. Then afterwards we realized, okay, what parts of Sei can be improved? And we talked to a bunch of different exchanges around that. The time to finality became very clear, as did the throughput piece of it. So that's why we made changes at the consensus level and the protocol level. The consensus level changes, we basically took Tendermint and then we pushed it to its absolute limits. We changed the way that block propagation worked. We changed the way that the block processing worked. And that's what allowed us to get down to that 450 millisecond time to finality, which is an order of magnitude faster than basically every other chain out there right now. And then we also added in parallelization at the protocol level. And both of these changes were relatively easy for us to make because of how modular the Cosmos SDK is. So I definitely think that was the right decision in retrospect. This allowed us to get to single slot finality. And more importantly, it allowed us to work with the code base that was already very battle tested. And it reduced the blast scope of issues that would potentially come up and allowed us to just move much faster as well.
Do you envision a future where that Sei is built, outside of the kind of the Cosmos SDK Tendermint, but then kind of break through, some sort of limitation and become even bigger?
Absolutely. So our mission is to build best infrastructure for exchanges. And that infrastructure can take many different forms. So we are not just completely tied to this idea of using Cosmos and Tendermint. In reality, this is a good starting point, but we already have a lot of ideas around how we can just completely change Tendermint. And I mean, we've already changed block propagation, block processing, but there's ideas we have for the actual consensus piece of it that can be changed as well to lead to better performance from a user standpoint. And yeah, I mean, the Cosmos SDK piece, there's a lot of inefficiencies around how state management works, for example. So we're already actively working on ripping that out. And I mean, in the future, the best infrastructure is what we're focused on building, and that doesn't have to be on Cosmos.
Got it. And, last year has been kind of a bear market, but we still see many layer 1 and even layer 2 coming out. Even now, people are talking about layer 3, and everyone kind of have their own token as a sort. For layer 2, it's almost like there's no reason because you don't even use that token for gas payment, but it's more used as an incentive, right? We're seeing OP and ARP giving out, a lot of these ecosystem. Even I make a video and talk about it. There's some sort of ecosystem incentive, but now after a few rounds, people are debating whether it makes sense to do these incentives. Some of them are huge. There are millions of dollars worth of token being given out. How do you see Sei token being used, and learning from some of these predecessors how they've done their airdrop, and what's your plan there?
Yeah, so Sei is a layer 1 blockchain. So Sei is going to be offering a utility token that is going to be used for a few different use cases. The first will be to secure the network. So Sei makes use of a proof of stake consensus mechanism. So Sei will be staked, and that'll help secure the network. The second thing is for governance. So to be able to vote, you need to stake your Sei tokens, and then that'll give you the voting power to engage in governance. And the last thing is for transaction fees. So from that standpoint, Sei is similar to every other major layer 1 blockchain. I would say what makes Sei even more interesting on top of that is this idea of MEV redistribution. So MEV stands for maximal extractable value. Would it be helpful for me to kind of go into an example around how that would work for the audience? Or
go for it.
So MEV is basically the money that can be made by either changing the ordering of transactions or by including or excluding transactions. So whoever the block producer is, they get to decide what transactions to include in a block. And in some cases, it might be profitable for them to change the ordering of transactions. One example of this would be, let's say that there's a puzzle, and whoever is able to solve that puzzle wins $100, right? Let's say that me let's say there's 99 listeners right now, all 100 of us know the answer to this puzzle. So all of us submit a transaction, but whoever's transaction is at the top of the block is the only one that wins $100. So suddenly there's a ton of incentive to work with the block producer to have your transaction be the one that's at the top of the block. So let's say that I'm willing to pay $10 for it, and you're willing to pay $11 to the block producer to get your transaction included at the top of the block. That would be kind of how MEV would work. In Ethereum right now, there's this project called Flashbots, which allows people to bid to have their transaction be included in a block. And Sei is going to be building out something similar. So if you want to have your transaction get included, you would just pay a bid. And if you end up winning that auction, then your bid will go to the chain, and then you end up getting that spot in the block. So what makes this particularly interesting is because as there end up being more people that are like identifying this opportunity, as like once you start having a competitive searcher market, this results in people trying to bid up against one another. Like I might be willing to bid $10, someone else might be willing to bid $11, and people will just keep outbidding each other until it gets like $99.99 to win a $100 opportunity. So whoever identifies this opportunity, they might pay a bid of like 99.99. They'll make a profit of like 0.1 cent. And then whatever the value of that bid is, that will get redistributed to stakers of the network and to validators. So this ends up becoming a long-term way for validators to help offset their infrastructure costs and to provide incentive to keep securing the chain. And this also provides additional yield for anyone that is helping stake the chain. And in Sei's case, because it's a trading-focused ecosystem, it results in even more trading activity that's going to be happening on Sei. And most of this MEV ends up being tied to trading. So I think long-term, that's going to be one of the most interesting ways for value accrual to happen on Sei.
Got it. And are there any mechanism to prevent some of the MEV attack where we're seeing, I think last month there were some MEV that got attacked and was basically spoofing trades. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the way that Sei thinks about it is we want to stop bad MEV and we want to redistribute other types of MEV. So bad MEV would be stuff like front running, and then other types of MEV, they're kind of unavoidable. For example, liquidations, ARBs, NFT mints, they're all going to happen and they're all going to have value tied to them. And rather than trying to stop them, which is impossible, it just makes more sense to redistribute those more neutral types of MEV. In the case of front running, though, it's really bad, right? In traditional financial markets, front running is illegal. And the way that front running works is someone who's a sophisticated player, for example, a searcher or a block producer, they might see that I want to buy some token for $10 and I'm willing to accept up to 5% slippage. So I'm willing to pay up to $10.50 to buy that token, right? Mm-hmm. So what they'll do is they'll just buy all of that token on the market. Let's assume that there's low liquidity, so they're able to buy all of that that's there on the market right now for $10. Then they place a limit order to sell it to me for $10.50, and then I end up buying it for $10.50. So front running is really bad because you, the sophisticated player, took this information that you had about the trade that I want to place, and you sold it to me at a higher price, or you can also buy it at a lower price. Like there's multiple ways to take advantage of this. But basically you're exploiting me, and that's extremely predatory. And Sei's native matching engine makes use of frequent batch auctions. What that means is that every single order in a block will get filled at the exact same price. So this idea of being able to buy something, then place a limit order to sell it at a higher price, and then having it get executed at that higher price, that's just not possible within a single block on Sei. So to help prevent this bad MEV, I would say that Sei is a much better ecosystem than Ethereum, Solana, or any other more general purpose ecosystem.
Got it. Can you tell me more about the consensus and the staking? How much token is needed? How technical does the retail need to be? Can they participate?
Mm-hmm. So Sei makes use of a delegated proof of stake consensus mechanism. What this means is that there's a cap on the number of validators. Mm-hmm. So if you're a validator, then you can go ahead and stake yourself, and other people can delegate to your validator as well. And then the top N validators will be actually engaging in consensus. And then everyone else can pick one of these top N validators, and then you can go ahead and delegate your tokens to these validators. If these validators behave maliciously and they end up getting slashed, then your tokens will get slashed as well. So you'll lose money if the person that you trust your tokens with behaves maliciously. But if this validator behaves positively and they're engaging in consensus well, then they'll be receiving staking rewards, and those staking rewards will get distributed to you. So for a normal person to engage in securing Sei, you do not need to be technical at all. It's extremely simple, and you can play around with it on testnet right now as well. You can go to the Sei.io web app, and then afterwards you can just go to the staking tab and then pick one of the testnet validators, stake it with them. Super simple process to do that.
What's the APY going to look like, token wise, not price wise? Do you think to maintain the network?
Yeah. So there's no public specifics around the inflation schedule for Sei. That'll be something that the Sei Foundation will announce closer to the actual day of mainnet.
Got it. And how many delegator will there be in the beginning?
That is also not something that has been announced by the Sei Foundation yet. But in testnet, I believe it's 40 validators. So something in that general range.
Got it. I mean, some interesting protocol will be, compounding these yields, self-collect and then redelegate. Are any protocol approaching that are building something similar? Or, we're seeing a lot of LSD-Fi not on Ethereum. It seems like this could be also an LSD token where wrap Sei are out there trading and then the real Sei has been delegated.
Yeah, so there's LSTs that are going to be live on Sei from day one of mainnet. So that'll be a really easy way for folks in the community to...
What's the name of the project?
I don't want to I don't want to say the project if it hasn't been announced yet. So I would need to check quickly if it's been announced. But yeah, there will definitely be LST projects on Sei from day one.
Got it. Yeah, because I think that's because our viewers are mainly DeFi maxi, right? So LSD-Fi and LSD have been one of our top topic that we've been talking about for the past few months. And it's always interesting to see these proof of stake and delegated proof of stake design where user that kind of buy the narrative of the chain and then don't necessarily just hold the token. They can actually participate in an easy format and earn token from it. So I think, and
yeah,
what are
I think that LSTs are definitely unavoidable from having projects deploy them. And I think it ends up being really good for the user experience because you're able to help secure the chain, you're able to collect yield, and then you're able to use those tokens to engage in other kind of activities on chain, which just leads to more collateral that is available to be used on chain. But I think it ends up being in the happy path that ends up being really positive for the ecosystem.
Got it. And what's your thought about, we kind of briefly talk about how other layer 1 and layer 2, when they've done their kind of ecosystem incentive and airdrop. And what's your thought about these airdrop and because we're seeing a lot of these, quote unquote farmhouse where they're farming airdrops, right? Where, and these numbers can grow dramatically. There are videos around how people farm Aptos and Sui where it's like it looks like internet cafe where people just have a bunch of computer and just farming these tokens. And then I guess what I'm trying to say is that the purpose of the token is to incentivize and reward early adopter. But now we're just having these fake humans, if dare I say, that are just getting a token, controlling the network, just dump the token. What are ways that have the foundation implemented to prevent these I guess malicious farming of the early adopter token?
Yeah. So I mean, I can't really speak for Sei Foundation. I can just give you my own thoughts around this matter. So first of all, I think that it's pretty just valuable for the community to have some kind of initial way to access these tokens, especially if the community has been getting involved in the testnet period as well. I do think that is just a really good way to get community involvement from day one. So I do think having programs like this is good. I think the downside of just giving tokens without really having any future work that needs to be done is that people will just claim these tokens, sell them, and then not really contribute anything for the long term of the ecosystem. So I think structuring any kind of token incentive events in a way where there ends up being more long term alignment, I think that ends up being extremely positive for the ecosystem. So I think any of these airdrops that have retroactively given out tokens, that ends up being really valuable. And also having some type of criteria to unlock tokens or to claim tokens, I think that also ends up being better for longer term value alignment.
Awesome. And I have to ask, how do you compare to other layer one, such as Solana, Sui, and Aptos?
Yeah, so I would say that if you're building an exchange, Sei is going to undoubtedly be the best place to build. I kind of talked about the technical problems with these other layer ones before. So I would say that from Sei's standpoint, there's one core value proposition that really stands out, which is that building a trading application on Sei will help offer a better user experience than building that same trading application on any other infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And if you just look at building things on chain right now, it's really bad from both a developer standpoint and also from a user standpoint.
Yeah.
Right. Like everything is super slow. It's clunky. Onboarding experience is difficult. And the world that we imagine is one where, using something on chain will feel just like using it in a Web 2 way. Mm-hmm. Right. Like it'll be a similar experience like going to google.com and typing in a query. We want it to be as seamless as that to go and do something on chain. I think right now the delta is massive. Right now they're like night and day in terms of the user experiences. What we're really focused on is helping bridge that gap. We want the user experience of building on chain and using these applications on chain to be as close to that of using a Web 2 application as possible. And that's what we're committing all of our time and all of our resources into, especially for trading applications, to help bridge that gap. And make it as seamless of a user experience as we possibly can.
Got it. And lastly, you mentioned that there are many projects that are already building on Sei, and you like Sushi. What are other projects that you're exciting that are also building on Sei right now that user can follow?
So one common misconception that folks have is that Sei is a DeFi focused chain. Yeah. Sei is not a DeFi focused chain at all. And that's because trading is the most general purpose type of use case out there, right? Like everything ends up requiring trading in some capacity. So as a result, there's a lot of different types of applications building on Sei, including NFTs, games, social applications. A few that I'll talk about right now would be, first of all, Fable. So Fable is building an esports league on Sei, which I think that's super cool because there's very strong network effects that can happen from something like that. And if it does take off, then it'll result in a lot of engagement from, not just like individual users, but teams of users that'll then compete against each other. So I'm super excited to see that project, and it's live on testnet if any listeners want to play along with it. Another project would be Tatami. So that's a game publisher that is being built on Sei.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, dude, it's sick. And then
are they building a fully on-chain game, like everything on-chain, or partially?
They're building a game publisher, so other people can make use of that to help build games on-chain. I'm trying to think of another project. I guess one other one that I'll mention that I was talking about before is Nitro. Nitro is a rollup that is being built on Sei. So it seems like there is demand for multiple rollups, actually. There's another one called Paddle, which is building a Move VM-based rollup on Sei. So long-term, I think Sei is going to be home to not just projects being built at the base level, but also other types of projects that are being built to offer like different execution environments on top of Sei.
Is that would that be considered a layer 2 for Sei?
It would be considered a layer 2 for Sei. So yeah, it's pretty wild to see this activity happening already, even before the mainnet launch.
Got it. And for the listener, what's the best way for them to get involved in Sei? And when's the mainnet?
When mainnet? Man, I've started on every single one of my tweets. I get at least a few questions or a few replies around when mainnet. So I love that question. Sei Foundation will give more information around the mainnet launch. I personally can't really say anything around that. In terms of getting involved with Sei, so some of the things that I'm very excited about, first of all, there's going to be an AI/crypto hackathon that Sei is going to help organize in the near future. So this is going to be a really good way to start building. I would say for more like AI x crypto collaborations, there's like 3 levels. There's like the completely front-end facing level, which is like building a chatbot that reads data on chain and then like does something based off of that. Then there's level 2, which is some portion of the activity actually is built into the chain itself. For example, like payments. So like you have a smart contract or something that helps with payments, and then other parts of it happen off chain. And then the third level would be the entire AI application being built on chain. I think there's a lot of exploration that has happened for level 1, but not enough for level 2 and level 3. So I'm particularly excited to see developers explore how to build those crypto/AI applications for level 2 and level 3. So that's one way to get engaged. Besides that, there's the Sei Network Twitter handle. So SEINETWORK on Twitter. You could go ahead and follow that and join the community on Discord and all the other socials.
Awesome. All right. That's about it. Thank you so much for your time today. And then, obviously everything will be translated. 我们今天会把所有今天跟 Jay 聊到的部分都会做翻译，然后希望这一集有让大家更认识 Sei。那我们未来都有机会可以再请 Jay， 甚至于他的 founder Jeff 一起来到这个活动，然后聊更深层的议题哦。那在这个新的节目里面，我们就想要让大家用一个轻松的方式，可以认识到这些创始人，因为在每一个项目后面背后都还是这些人在做这个项目。All right, thank you so much for your time, Jay. Is there any last word you would like to talk to the Chinese community?
No, thank you so much for having me on, and thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Awesome, thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.